Hello and welcome to Hugging the Snug. Today we are joined by Thomson, Director for Energy at ARUP. Alan, you know this is called Hugging the Snug, so the first thing is to give each other a hug.
Okay.
Thank you. So we're here today to talk about microgrids. The first thing that we should touch upon is, what are microgrids? Could you give us a small introduction about them?
Okay, so let's go for a little tour around a microgrid.
Yeah.
A microgrid is really a microcosm of the larger energy network, larger energy grid. So it's got a little bit of energy generation, it's got a network, and it's got some people that are using energy or load, if you like. And that's wrapped around by a boundary, which may be a boundary of a campus, it may be a boundary of a manufacturing facility, or some form of coherent boundary. And it's got a control system which controls the microgrid. It also can be linked back to the grid, so instead of acting like an island, it can act as a grid-connected island.
Well, that's very interesting, especially because you already mentioned two different deployments of microgrids that are not island or remote areas. Can we explore what kind of deployments are microgrids found currently, today? Okay,
so to do that, it's worth exploring what it is that the end user is trying to get out of that microgrid. And this sort of falls back to the energy trilemma, which I know is one of your favourites. So, you know, are we looking for security? Are we looking for low carbon? Or are we looking for affordability and the cost of that energy? That will dictate how you configure and use your microgrid. So for instance, you might be in a sub-Saharan African community or in the middle of the outback in Australia, where you're acting pretty much as an island. So you've got your PV generation, you've got some storage, and then you've got some loads, and that all gets on by itself. And if you've got some problems with the interconnection, or if you don't have an interconnection from the main grid, then things are fine. They just work away. Bits of extra generation, then you use the microgrid to create a little bit of extra load by turning some things on. If the reverse happens, then you can reduce your load to match what your generation capacity is. Other opportunities, you might have a very secure manufacturing facility, or one that requires resilience, perhaps a military facility where banking data, where having absolute security is the key. So when we're looking at things like Hurricane Sandy and recent flooding in the UK, was thinking about, well, would we have been more secure with microgrids? And in a number of instances we may well have been. You might have a production facility, say microchip manufacture, where any damage to the quality or the availability of energy is significantly disruptive to your process and costly if it happens. Then another approach is to look at campus, so where you're in control of the whole campus, say an educational campus, for instance, or some of the blue chip companies that are now starting to look at that, where they're demonstrating their credentials. They're looking at how they can make it commercially viable, as well as looking at their carbon footprint. So how much of their own energy, renewable distributed energy, are they using themselves, and how much are they kicking out to the grid? So a number of different options and ways that can be played to solve the energy trilemma.
But we haven't actually explained what the energy trilemma is, so just to clarify, okay. It's cost, so it's affordability, it's security, and it's sustainability, hence reducing your carbon emissions.
That's right.
And I understand that there are different applications, but from your examples, it seems like microgrids are completely revolutionizing the way we consume electricity, but also we produce electricity. Do you see it as the new energy revolution?
I see it as part of the new energy revolution, and how you can start knitting things together in the same way that the grid does at a larger scale, but you do it at a smaller scale. So your ability to reduce energy losses, the ability to be in control of your own destiny to a degree, the ability to use your own renewables at the most high value point in their chain, the ability not to have to convert that energy, perhaps from DC to AC and then back to DC, and all the energy losses that happen in that process. So microgrids will be part of the broader energy mix, and increasingly so, but they are part of bringing diversity to the energy mix. Like many other forms of diversity are valuable to give resilience.
So it's just one part of the big energy mix that we're going to live and breathe in the next 10 to 20 years. But you mentioned storage, for example, is a big problem in macrogrids. How will storage be a part of the microgrids if they don't have to be converted, if the energy doesn't have to be converted? Where do you see the storage argument fitting in microgrids?
So storage is another key component of a microgrid, along with the load and the generation and the various bits that knit that together. Because your generation within that microgrid may not happen at the same time as your load demands. So you need to be able to time shift that generation. In other words, you need to be able to store it and use it later. Now, you may want to do that because you want to get maximum revenue from the grid, helping the main grid, or it might be that you want to use as much of your renewable energy yourself. So if you've got photovoltaic on the roof and you want to use that energy later in the day, perhaps when the sun's gone down, having some form of storage is an essential component of that. It allows you to deal with many other things in terms of the power quality on the system and maximising indigenous use of energy. So it is absolutely critical that you have a form of energy storage within your microgrid control.
Absolutely. I like that you mentioned the production of electricity, of energy, and then the consumption, because obviously if we see it on a graph, you can tell that obviously the sun doesn't shine at night, and that's when you need it the most. If we try to step backwards a moment and try to identify where microgrids application can be considered in a city, for example, so in a community, how would you see it in the smart city argument? Would they fit together? Will they be separated? And if it does, how would you see their development in the next 5 to 10 years?
So I think initially the microgrids will be relatively modest in a city setting. In an out of town setting, perhaps on a large academic campus, for instance, they could be quite sizable. But I think in a city context, they'll be relatively small, and then they can all start to knit together. Because they are islands with a link into the grid, they can be islands with a link into the next microgrid and the next microgrid. I suppose the analogy is with heat networks. So you might have a number of heat networks which are relatively close to one another, and they work well, but they work much better when they all start to be connected, and you have diversity of supply, you have some thermal storage, and you have diversity of demand. It just helps the whole system to function more effectively.
Okay, but if they function as microcosm, okay, so we can understand that a microgrid is a microcosm of differentiated energy production. This is a similar argument in the way electric vehicles have been used as batteries for the energy grid, so the macrogrid. Don't you see it as something so innovative that could completely change the way we use and produce electricity? Or still just as a part of it? Because I see you a bit reluctant to go one way or another. I was trying to really get your idea.
You're very keen to have that silver bullet.
Yes.
Just one thing that solves everything. And actually, from my perspective, energy is not about one solution which solves absolutely everything. It's a number of different solutions appropriately applied that bring the overall benefit. And primarily that's through diversity. And it's the same in the larger national grids and international grids. The diversity is so important. So microgrids are no different from that. They're another part of the equation.
Thank you very much. This is all for today. Bye.